for cultivating progress across the South, for working to unconditionally improve the lives of all, and for the bold underwriting of every Gravy podcast. SFA thanks our visionary Louisville, Kentucky friends, Pam and Brooke Smith.
Biloxi, Mississippi has long called itself the seafood capital of the world. But last May, big news hit town.
Mary Mahoney's Old French House Incorporated, as well as the restaurant's co-owner and manager, pled guilty today to conspiracy to misbrand fish and wire fraud.
The company admitted that between December 2013 and November 2019, it fraudulently sold more than 29 tons of fish, claiming it was local seafood when it was actually being imported.
Mary Mahoney's might be the most famous restaurant in Biloxi. It's more than 60 years old and situated downtown in a grand old house. And it turns out selling imported seafood as local wasn't just a Mary Mahoney's thing. Other restaurants in town were also mislabeling and upselling their seafood. When this story broke, an odd thing happened. Local seafood lovers were being cheated, but they didn't seem to care. Instead, many rallied behind Mahoney's. The Biloxi Sun-Herald even ran a headline that noted how diners loved them anyway. You're listening to Gravy.
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 A production of the Southern Foodways Alliance, Gravy tells the stories of the changing American South. I'm Melissa Hall, and in this episode of Gravy, writer Boyce Upholt takes us to the Mississippi coast to figure out what's happening in a changing dining scene and on the changing Gulf Coast.
Biloxi. There's no place quite like it.
When I started to dig into the story of Biloxi and its fraudulent seafood, I stumbled onto a series of videos that the city had produced at some point, years ago, and posted to their YouTube page. They give a good sense of how this place likes to advertise itself.
Beaches, golf, fishing, and casinos.
I noticed in particular that the water here was described as a place to play.
When it comes to tourism, Biloxi's in the big leagues.
And maybe that's fair enough. Biloxi once was a favored destination for New Orleanians on vacation. But in the late 19th century, things began to change here, as another one of those city videos explains.
With the invention of artificial ice in the mid-19th century and the coming of the railroad in the 1870s, the Biloxi seafood industry was going to experience a boom.
The first known written record of Biloxi, from a Canadian-born French explorer in 1699, mentions the rather good oysters he found on this sandy peninsula. Indigenous people had been eating oysters here for thousands of years. What was new at the end of the 1800s was that they were being shipped to far-flung locations. Canneries popped up along the Biloxi shoreline, big, clattering factories where the oysters were shucked and packed into cans.
By 1904, Biloxi was known as the seafood capital of the world. With the demand for labor high, Polish, Acadian French, and Slavic workers came to work in Biloxi's seafood industry.
This made for a second identity in Biloxi. Here's a fisherman named Frank Parker talking about it on the local news in 2023.
You could walk out my front door. I mean, you could, if you look north, you could see boats. You looked east, you could see boats. You look south, you could see boats. There's just shrimp houses and shrimp houses. You could smell the smell of seafood.
The Southern Foodways Alliance, which produces this podcast, interviewed Frank Parker too, and a few other fishermen back in 2008 for an oral history project. Listening now, these interviews sound like an extended obituary. Imported seafood began undercutting local prices in the 1980s. Here's Richard Galot, who has long worked in the shrimp industry, talking about how restaurants soon lost their loyalty.
You know, if nobody complains about it and it works for them, they don't care. They want the cheapest thing that they can feed to people and make as much money as they can.
I can't help but note the irony. Biloxi became the seafood capital in large part because people figured out how to send its oysters across the globe. But now, as other countries industrialized and began to ship out their seafood, that hit the town hard. The canneries began to shutter.
And little by little, it kept phasing out. And then there ain't too many shrimp boats left.
That's a retired shrimper named Corky Heyer. Remember, these interviews were from 2008, just 3 years after Hurricane Katrina, which made all the problems even worse. And this was 2 years before the Deepwater Horizon disaster, which sent oil spreading across the Gulf and seafood sales plummeting. Already, though, the situation felt existential. Here's one last voice, a fisherman named Sammy Moniford.
You're not going to be able to save this industry. Just the prices of everything and the imports of shrimp, you can't. I don't see it happening.
It's not known exactly when Mary Mahoney's began mislabeling its fish, but investigators determined it was at some point between 2002 and 2012. Officials from the restaurant declined to comment for the story, but state records and court documents detail much of what happened. The investigation goes back to 2016, when an anonymous source gave state officials a tip. Mary Mahoney's and its seafood suppliers had for years been mislabeling some of their fish. The case eventually focused on one particular species, red snapper, a premium Gulf product, which had been replaced by cheap imported African perch, among other species. The FDA got involved and in 2019 raided the restaurant. A reporter named Anita Lee from the Sun-Herald stopped by and recorded a quick comment with the restaurant's lawyer.
This is a broader investigation than Mahoney's, is that right?
Most likely, but I don't know. I don't want to go anything beyond than what I know to be true. They showed up this morning. They're investigating about fish, and Mahoney's has cooperated fully, and they should be finishing up shortly, and Mary Mahoney's will be open for dinner tonight.
Representatives for the restaurant have said in court that the fraud stopped after that 2019 raid. But it wasn't until 2024 that charges were brought and the restaurant pleaded guilty. And only then did the public learn what Mary Mahoney's had been up to. The investigation found that at least 55,000 customers had purchased mislabeled fish. And that was just the beginning. Mahoney's supplier, Quality Poultry and Seafood, another iconic Biloxi business, had sold mislabeled fish to other restaurants too. Some of them knew about the scam, some did not. Eventually, both businesses had to forfeit more than $1 million apiece. Quality's sales manager was sentenced to prison. And at the same time this played out in courts, there was a new development.
A new study tonight revealing the truth behind the menu. Which Gulf Coast restaurants are actually serving what they say they're selling?
In the wake of the Mahoney's guilty plea, a consulting group had come to the Biloxi area to conduct anonymous tests in restaurants. SEAD, the company is called, spelled S-E-A-D. They worked with funding from a lobbying group for Gulf shrimpers. And they found that out of 44 restaurants in the area, only 8 were properly labeling their shrimp.
And it is a real slap in the face of our industry that the actual city that is known as the shrimp capital has so many inauthentic products served to diners. It's just wrong.
That's Dave Williams, SEAD's founder. He developed a new genetic test and he's had it peer-reviewed. Basically, you can extract genetic material even from a cooked dish and see if it's the species of shrimp that's farmed in Asia, which is where most of the imports come from.
We're making it affordable and we're making it easy. Because affordable and easy is the way you get enforcement.
Besides just the fact of misleading customers, there are other consequences to such fraud. Studies have found that imported shrimp often contain banned veterinary drugs. And then there's an economic issue. Dave did some back-of-the-envelope math for me. He figured that if you could cut fraud in half in terms of shrimp, replace half of the mislabeled imports with actual Gulf shrimp, then that would bring in nearly $1 billion to U.S. shrimpers every year. So he's been going from town to town along the Gulf, finding almost everywhere the same problem as in Biloxi. He says it's making a difference.
The price of shrimp to the boats has gone up, and it could be a combination of different factors. But I also think public awareness of what's going on has played quite an important part.
What Dave is saying is that the public cares. But I was struck by the situation in Biloxi. After Mary Mahoney's pleaded guilty, one diner had commented on Facebook about deciding to go eat there anyway, and finding a full, packed house. "I can't wait to get home and support my favorite restaurant," another wrote.
When we come back, we'll grapple with a puzzle. Mary Mahoney's is a community favorite in part because it's local, and yet it wasn't, and people didn't seem to mind. We'll try to understand why after the break. But first, love listening to Gravy? Excited to read SFA's weekly newsletter? Want to spend the weekend with curious eaters from across the South and beyond, lapping up engaging talks and delectable bites? Then join us for SFA's Fall Symposium in Birmingham, Alabama. We'll gather October 25th and 26th to weave together engaging talks, great food, compelling films, and thought-provoking conversations focused on the Southern city. Together, we'll consider the ways the urban South shapes how we eat, how we think about ourselves, and how we understand this place we call home. Tickets go on sale in August. Hope to see you in the ham.
When I went to visit Biloxi, I found that a lot of people didn't want to talk about the Mary Mahoney scandal. It was a big fuss in a small town, a place where the Mahoney family name means a lot. But eventually, I tracked down one of the Facebook posters who expressed support for the restaurant. Debbie Bhatia had written that Mary Mahoney's had long been her family's choice for special occasions. And she told me it will remain that choice into the future.
I mean, it's just such a wonderful place to go. The atmosphere is terrific. The people are terrific. Everything about it is just makes you just keep want to going back.
Debbie knows the town's history. She's watched as the number of fishermen has declined. But she works in her family's furniture and interior design business. She admitted her knowledge of seafood doesn't run very deep.
I know what I like, a white flaky fish. I know what to order, and that's about it. So I didn't really think much of it, frankly.
To me, this served as a reminder. Sure, Biloxi likes to market its seafood history, but that's not the only story here. There have always been people who live and work on the land here who just appreciate living alongside an ocean. And there's always been tourism, which boomed in the mid-20th century when a man-made beach was installed along its marshy shores.
The white sand beach quickly became a tourist attraction for those coming in droves on the new superhighway. New motels, restaurants, and nightclubs sprang up along the beachfront.
Nightclubs is a nice way of saying casinos, which were technically illegal, but Biloxi leaders looked the other way. That added to the town's Old South vibes a bit of clandestine appeal. Mary Mahoney's old French house opened in this era, in 1964. The family had ties to the shrimping industry. Indeed, Mary Mahoney's brother, a partner in the restaurant, sold his shrimp boat to raise the money needed to buy the property. Just a few years later, Biloxi went through one of the most momentous events in the town's history.
Then in 1969, Hurricane Camille wrought destruction on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. In the wake of the storm, the people picked themselves up and began to rebuild.
After Camille, Interstate 10 was completed just a few miles inland, draining tourist traffic from downtown. By the late 1980s, Biloxi was, as one visiting journalist put it, a hard-time city. But change was coming.
Biloxi's economy recovered slowly until 1992, when the state of Mississippi legalized dockside gaming, igniting the biggest economic boom in Biloxi's history.
This, as it happens, was also the ascendant era for big national sit-down restaurant chains. Think TGI Fridays, Olive Garden. These kinds of restaurants began to appear in Biloxi after the new casinos opened. And now the casinos themselves added another big dash of could-be-anywhere food. Here, for example, is an advertisement for Beau Rivage, one of the town's big casinos.
And feast on pub-style favorites like hearty appetizers, oversized hamburgers, brick oven pizza, and other savory entrees to fulfill all your cravings.
And then, in 2005, came Katrina, another storm that, like Camille, looms large in Biloxi's story. It looms large in the story of Mary Mahoney's, too. This was one of the first local restaurants to reopen its doors.
When they opened, it was such a relief for all of us because we had nowhere to go to get out of I called it the debris zone and the hellhole all of us were living in, with all our homes gutted and businesses gutted.
Mary Mahoney's had at this point become a symbol. It was a survivor on a Gulf Coast that had been ravaged by so many forces, by a global economy, but also by nature itself. But as I talked to Debbie Bhatia, I couldn't help but think of those oral histories with fishermen, bemoaning the end of an industry. They often talked about their intimate connections with the ocean. Here, for example, is Sammy Monteford again.
Yeah, when you live in an area where, your food is abundance, that's what you grow up accustomed to. Very seldom ever eat meat. A lot of people don't eat meat around here. I mean, that's because they're used to eating seafood. That's what their taste is,
The This loss of intimacy seemed to be reflected in the restaurants themselves. The all-you-can-eat buffets and po' boys began to substitute foreign shrimp, and diners didn't seem to notice. In my research, I came across a 2002 article from a food critic in the Biloxi Sun-Herald. She heaped praise on red lobster. Fresh seafood served consistently well, she wrote. In the meantime, the fine dining scene was, according to some people, getting kind of stale.
It sort of was taking what New Orleans was doing maybe 50 or 60 years ago and just sort of running with that. You know, lots of that black and red fish, tasso cream, a lot of those kinds of things.
That's a chef named Alex Perry. He grew up on the Mississippi Gulf Coast and left a while to cook, then moved back in 2013. Alex was an ambitious young chef then and wanted to open his own restaurant. And he'd found an affordable property in his hometown of Ocean Springs, which sits just across the bay from Biloxi. Alex's restaurant is called Vestige, and it stood out from the local scene.
You know, I would say when we opened, we were very Southern heavy. Just, you know, sort of that Sean Brock-esque kind of revival.
Southern ingredients and techniques in a modern and innovative fine dining context. Alex wanted to use as much local product as possible, and remembers not being sure if other local restaurants were doing the same, especially when it came to seafood.
You always had a suspicion, but you couldn't 100% know. It was just one of those things. People just weren't talking about it.
Alex told me he actually serves some non-local seafood himself. What he cares most about is sustainability. So he's happy to bring in, say, Alaskan king salmon, which is both tasty and carefully regulated.
Now, crustaceans, that's pretty much all local. Why would you go anywhere else? There's no reason to.
Last year, Vestige was a finalist for the James Beard Award for Best Restaurant in the country. This is high-end stuff, a tasting menu these days, one that's heavily influenced by the Japanese heritage of Alex's wife and co-owner, Kumi Omori. Their nomination served as a kind of notice. This strip of coastline in Mississippi was no longer just all-you-can-eat shrimp and crab au gratin.
Because one thing that I'm very encouraged by is the amount of really cool restaurants starting to open up is increasing dramatically. Chefs that I know that care about these things, it's local, fresh.
This means more people who see local product as part of telling the local story. But there's a caveat.
We are very niche. We're sort of a percentage of a percentage in that, you know, all of the vast majority of it are definitely tourists or locals who just don't care.
Fine dining restaurants can take this mission only so far, in other words.
It's like, give it to me cheap, give it to me big, give it to me fried. We're good. No, you lie to me. It's all right, but it's fine. It's okay. And it's really not. But that's just a personal decision people have to make. What are you comfortable with? Are you cool with an entire industry disappearing?
Personally, I love fried shrimp. As much as anything, it's a local recipe, the flavor of this coast. But what does it mean when a local recipe is made with a foreign product? What we're figuring out now is what parts of Biloxi's culture matter. The crux of the issue, in other words, isn't about big or fried. Cheap, though, that's more complicated. I left Vestige worried that local seafood might become a luxury. But then I visited another restaurateur named Bill Bradley.
I'm glad I've met you because I feel like coming out of the way I've been thinking about this is like right now it's mostly like these high-end restaurants that are so focused on Gulf products. Not that this isn't a lovely establishment, but it's very different, right?
It's a gas station.
The restaurant is inside a Shell station, 8 pumps. Inside, there's a counter where diners can buy fried or boiled seafood. And Bill says the economics work.
The only 2 import shrimp that we have in our store are the Argentine Reds and then the tail on, just because tail on is so expensive. Our fried shrimp are all domestic. They all come from Paul Piazza and Sons in Louisiana. But no, the shrimp that we use for our salads, they're all everything else here.
For Bill, this is personal. He's got shrimpers in his family. He's actually set up his own distribution company to ensure he can get quality local product.
We prove to a lot of people we can sell you domestic around the same price, and they went for it.
After Bradley's, I went to talk with one more chef, Austin Sumrall. I should probably disclose, I wrote a magazine profile of Austin years ago after he first opened White Pillars. I liked the food so much that we kept in touch and became friends. He catered my wedding, even.
So I grew up in Mahoney, Mississippi, which is not super far from here, a couple hours away.
After years of cooking across the South, Austin moved to the coast to be close to his wife's family. At first, he didn't take to it. Then he decided to make an effort to embrace the region.
It was something as simple as making sure that we went and walked on the beach every so often. Buying shrimp straight off the boats, going out to visit the oyster farms. Those kind of things really kind of get me going.
Back in Biloxi's heyday, there was a restaurant that was a key rival to Mary Mahoney's. White Pillars, it was called, because of a set of white columns out front that faced towards the Gulf. It's also built into a big old sprawling house. But this restaurant was shuttered in 1989. Austin visited and fell in love with the building, so he signed a lease-to-own agreement.
And at that point, it was kind of off to the races.
Last year, he opened a second restaurant, Siren Social Club. Twice in the past 5 years, he's been nominated for the James Beard Award for Best Chef in the South. Austin, in other words, is a part of the change that Alex Perry was talking about. He's very much made seafood a part of his brand. A few years back, he won a competition and was named the nation's seafood king.
So here at White Pillars, we do not serve anything in this restaurant that's not from the Gulf of Mexico.
Louisiana and Alabama both recently passed laws about seafood labeling. After Austin and I talked, Mississippi passed one too. It's an open question, though, how enforceable such laws will be, so Austin would also like to see a voluntary certification, a seal that could be placed in the doorways of restaurants like his that commit to serving only local seafood. He talked about how if things were properly labeled, then at least everyone could make the choice for themselves.
Then you're going to have a $9 po' boy and you're going to have a $14 po' boy, and then it'll be up to the consumer to decide if you want to spend an extra $5 for something local. And I know what my decision would be, but that doesn't have to be the decision for everybody.
I was stuck on a different question, though. Does all this matter? I kept thinking about Debbie Batia's frank admission that she knows she likes flaky white fish. I write about food quite a bit, but give me a taste test and I'm pretty sure I'd fail to pick out the local Gulf product. I always hear people talking about the fishing industry and how a way of life is disappearing. And sure, it's stirring to walk along the beach and know there are grizzled old fishermen making their living from the ocean. But fishing can be a difficult and dangerous business for those who do it. And it's worth saying it can be rough on ecosystems too. I noted some of this to Austin.
You can just drive a mile and a half that way and see the hundreds of shrimp boats. And I think that it would completely change the way this coast looks if that were to go away. But I don't know. You said the romance of it's not enough. It probably is for me.
Again and again, this is what I heard. Fishing is simply a part of life here. The place will change without it.
26 miles of white sand beach along the blue waters of the Mississippi Sound.
Obviously, it's sad when a way of life disappears, but places do change.
Oak trees felled by Hurricane Katrina, transformed into beautiful sculptures.
Businesses shutter.
The iconic Biloxi Light, standing proudly, fully restored.
I wonder, though, if Biloxi can afford to lose this part of its story.
A subtropical climate that invites outdoor activities year-round.
Biloxi's tourism economy might need that romance. The judge who oversaw the Mary Mahoney's case made a different point. The town owes something to its fishermen. They helped build this place.
Extraordinary sport fishing in the fertile fisheries crescent.
Biloxi exists because of the ocean, in other words.
A wide variety of sightseeing boat tours.
And if the ocean becomes just something to look at, something to contemplate while eating seafood from elsewhere, it seems like some knowledge is going to be lost. Which matters, I think, because the ocean, with its hurricanes and rising tides, will keep on shaping this place, no matter what we put on the menu.
Boyce Upholt is a James Beard Award-winning journalist and nature critic based in New Orleans. His first book, The Great River, The Making and Unmaking of the Mississippi, was published in 2024 and won the Willie Morris Award for Southern Writing. This episode comes complete with a reading list. To learn more, check out A Passion for People, The Story of Mary Mahoney and Her Old French House Restaurant by Edward J. LaPoma, and The Mississippi Gulf Coast Seafood Industry, A People's History by Deanne Love Stevens. This episode was produced in partnership with the Food and Environment Reporting Network an independent nonprofit news organization. We thank Wendell Patrick for Gravy's theme music. We also owe a huge thank you to Clay Jones and Broadcast Studios here in Oxford, Mississippi for recording and mixing Gravy. Managing editor for Gravy and all other SFA media is Sarah Camp Milam. Olivia Terenzio is our podcast editor. Fact-checking comes courtesy of Lisa Pollock. And Mary Beth Lassiter is our publisher. Visit us at southernfoodways.org for archival audio credits and sources for this episode, and to learn more about our work. While you're there, watch a film, listen to an oral history, read an article from Gravy Quarterly, or make a donation. Your dollars fund our work and help us make more Gravy. If you enjoyed this episode, leave us a rating or review and tell a friend. There is plenty of gravy to go around.